It's 3:30. It's time for us to get started. So we'll go ahead and get started with our final hour this afternoon. We've had some good lessons so far, and we're in for another treat. Scott Harp is going to be talking about the life of Gus Nichols. Brother Nichols, of course, was a powerful preacher of the gospel and an encourager and an inspiration to so many of us who knew him, who were around him, who worked for him, who preached along with him, and his memory still makes an impact after all these years. If you don't have the biography that Scott wrote on Gus Nichols, then you need to come forward tonight. Seriously though, Scott did an outstanding job writing that book. If you don't have it, you need it in your library. You need to read it. You need to read the footnotes. Everything in connection with that book is worth every penny you pay. $25 lectureship price. And I highly recommend that book, even if he does acknowledge me forward. But anyway.
And I get $9 back.
The book is over 500 pages long. In other words, about as long as one of Brother Nichols' sermons. But, having said that, Scott's here to talk about the life of Gus Nichols, so I won't take any more of his time. So.
David, can you come out some of lights if I make it show up a little bit more?
We'll see what we can do.
I have also, if you're interested in a PDF, I have them on jump drives. They're $15, so you can get those today.
Good. Okay, so that's better. Thank you.
So, 15 years old I was when Brother Nichols came to Forest Park, Georgia, just south of Atlanta. Preached. My dad was preaching there. Came for a gospel meeting. We were living in the church house next to the building, and I remember Brother Nichols staying with us back when preachers stayed with the families. You know, he came and stayed with us, and so I had I'm the oldest of three boys at the time, and so Brother Nichols and I shared a bedroom, and we had bunk beds in there, and so I felt like I knew him very, very well. I heard him snore. Put it this way, he really made an impression on me. I thought about him a lot at night. Anyway, I have just such a love and appreciation for him. There is no way that I can tell you everything I want to tell you. That's the reason I wrote the book. And more things are coming out as we've gone on, and I'm really excited about that. I know the family has gone back through some of the stuff. And he had so many filing cabinets full of things, and that's just kind of been packed away, and some of it's coming out now. And so Mark McWhorter's got a few things up there that he's gone through and is going to try to distribute some of those things for the family, try to get it out in preachers' hands. And so I'm excited about that. But Brother Nichols was so loved in this area, as David mentioned, and everybody just appreciated the heart of the man. And I appreciate him. This 15-year-old boy, I would sit as he preached at Forest Park for an hour and 15, 20 minutes on a Sunday morning, and I was mesmerized as a kid at how he could hold an audience. I'll never forget standing during a prayer, and I guess I'll do a little confessing here, but I remember looking at Brother Nichols during the prayer, and he's standing up in front of everybody, and his hands are just like this, and his head is down. He was like a child in the presence of God, and he lived that way. He loved preachers, and he loved preaching, and he had an impactful way to touch the lives of so many people. And by the time he passed from this life in 1975, the Abilene Christian College at that time, the Department of Communication, gave the family, Hardeman was over there, and Abilene received it, a posthumous award from the communication department to Brother Nichols for averaging preaching over 900 times a year. Now, he had two radio programs every day. He would be in meetings most all the time in the area. Obviously busy on Sundays. He had this Friday night class, so many things that he had. I mean, he had his finger in so many different pies. By the time he was 82, 83, he died at 83, but the time he got to that age, he was so much in demand that he was constantly either driving somewhere or going to Birmingham to catch a flight. And he was going to California, and he was going to Texas, and he was going to Oklahoma, and he was going to Indianapolis, and he was all over the country all the time. One of the things, I go year by year in the book, and as you go through the book, you just see, as time goes on, you're like, how does a person do this? So much every day. But he had dedicated his life at a young age to really, really set his mind to study the Word of God. And he came from a period of time when it was, hard work was all about what life was about. And so he decided early on that he was going to study the Word of God 5 hours every day. And he did that all the days of his life. And so you could see by his wide range of knowledge and understanding that it's little doubt as to why he would be able to be so good at what he did and so recognized by the brethren and so much looked to bring in to help to understand what the scriptures actually teach. And so I'm going to go briefly through this PowerPoint. I've got a lot of slides to show you. I don't know that we'll have all the time to do it, and I'm not even clicking. Am I on? I'm not clicking. Well, now that's the slide. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe we can find out. I tell you what, if you'll sit over there and just click for me.
Oh, well, I can.
Do that for me.
Do that until we get that to it.
It's not from. Just tell me when, like, ding.
Okay, ding. All right. His name was Bunyan Augustus Nichols, and if you'll notice the spelling of it, Bunyan Augustus. He always wanted to be called Gus because his name was written B-U-N-I-O-N. He said, I never really liked my first name because it was a bad sore that a person gets on the side of their foot. And he didn't like his second name because of Augustus being a horrible Roman leader. And so they just called me Gus. And so that's what he was called all his life. Are we moving?
Hold on. I'm good. Here we go.
Okay, all right. I'm really excited to show you this slide because this is a new, I've never seen this until this past week. One of the family, our Peggy champions, sent it to me. But you can see, this is at Iron Mountain Schoolhouse. Now, I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more in just a moment, but you can see where Gus is in the picture, and he's somewhere around 20 years old. But he's born in 1892, January the 12th, in rural Walker County, in a log cabin. Very, very humble beginning. He was the oldest of 10 children. He attended a one-room log building. This is probably a second building later on, but he got early education till about 12 years old, and his father really started needing him more in the fields, and so he got pulled out of school and he worked in the fields till he was about 20 years old, when his father finally set him free to be able to approach education on his own. But his family had been influenced by the Missionary Baptist Church. They were members of it. He became a Baptist in 1908. Next slide. The young man was so talented. He could play any musical instrument. And you can imagine back in those days, day and time, when all you had was being able to get together for a shindig on a Saturday night, that he would be there playing and entertaining the family. But he taught singing schools with his cousin, Larkin Wires. Y'all may know James Wires, used to preach up in Hamilton or Winfield, but now he's retired. But he's part of that family. So we taught with, I said Larkin Wires, it's Sam Wires. Larkin was another cousin who had actually taught him the truth before he joined the Baptist church. So it was about 1909 that Brother C.A. Wheeler had come into the area to preach the gospel. And I was talking to Tim just a minute before, because he had to leave, but he was talking about R.B. Trimble a few minutes ago that was influenced by Talbot Fanning. If you remember, some of you remember Flavel wrote a bulletin article. It's actually a little tract called The Power of One. Do y'all remember seeing that? But he talked about how Brother Trimble had taught a man by the name of E.A. Land the gospel, and E.A. Land had baptized a young man by the name of Joseph Holbrook. And Holbrook was one of Larimore's boys, attended the Larimore School there in Mars Hill. And so after Holbrook finished, he moved down into what is, in Fayette County, Alabama. And he was preaching in the area, and while over in Lamar County, he converted C.A. Wheeler. And so C.A. Wheeler's connection, of course, he's preaching, he's coming into the area, he's a Campbellite preacher, and so he's coming and he's going to preach this meeting at Iron Mountain Schoolhouse. There's no church there. And so he's going to come in there and preach. He needed a song leader. And so he and Sam Wires Gus and Sam Wires had just finished a singing school when Wheeler came into town. And so he says, well, I need a song leader for it. So he asked some of the locals there who would be a good song leader. And they said, well, I tell you, that young Gus Nichols, of course, he was a Baptist. But he says, well, I'll talk to him. So he goes and he talks to Gus. He said, would you lead the singing? He says, I tell you what. He said, if you'll just lead the songs, I'll take care of the preaching, and I promise you, I'll preach only the scriptures. And so Gus was fine with that. And so they had a real good singing that night, or at the start of the meeting, and he started preaching. Well, just immediately, Brother Nichols just was so amazed at how different and how plain and how clear the gospel was. It was almost like he had never heard it before. And so as the nights are progressing throughout the week, the excitement is there. He starts talking a little bit more about the possibility of becoming a New Testament Christian. And finally, on the last night of the meeting, he responded to the invitation, and Brother Wheeler baptized him into Christ for the remission of his sins. And so I'll talk about that in the book. So he's a New Testament Christian. Well, in 1912, this is around the time that his father finally released him, so he goes back to school and he finishes the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th grades. This is a photo that we're not fully aware of. The reason I wanted to go back to this slide is, of course, let's see, here's they say is, and you can tell, and the picture looks almost, if you look really close, and we can't do that here, but it looks a lot like it looks right here. So I'm going to say, when he is here, he's in this picture, he's probably right around 1912 or 13, and he has come back to finish school, but he's also teaching school. And so when you see him standing back here, it's almost like, these are all kids, and he's standing back here with some of the, I guess, what looks like the older teenagers, but he actually is probably one of the teachers here. And of course, here's a picture of Brother Wheeler. Well, about this time, well, I say about this time, he's still a young man. He had actually met Matilda when he was a younger man. They all kind of went to school in that one-room house, and they were all part of the same Baptist church, and so they kind of grew up together. But he and Matilda married. He wrote a beautiful poem about her, and it's in the book. He had written it. He wrote it several years later, but it's just a beautiful thought. But I actually put it at the end of the chapter where it talks about their getting married. But brother, I tell you, Brother Nichols had a great, encouraging wife and sister, Matilda Nichols. And of course, they had 8 children: Gracie, Bodie, Flavel, and Bertha, Carrie, Foy, Wallace, Hartman. If you notice the names, especially of the preachers or the guys, the boys, they're going to ultimately be preachers, but they're named after preachers, and we can spend a lot of time talking about that. It was around 1917 that an earthquake. It was a tornado. It probably seemed like an earthquake, but it was a tornado that came through Walker County, and it was coming up through Carbon Hill and the area where they lived. And of course, it was a Sunday morning. They had been to church. That afternoon, the weather just kind of gets that feeling in the air, like so often happens, before tornadoes come through. It was about 8 o'clock at night. They heard the roar come through. They tried to rush to get the family down into the fruit cellar underneath the house, or kind of under the floor. And he gets everybody in except himself. And as the winds come through, it hits or knocks a board loose, comes down and whacks him in the back of the head, knocks him out down into the floor. And of course, the family later surmised, I think I read where Hardeman said that the family thought it was like taking a box full of kitchen matches and just throwing them in the air is kind of what happened. Of course, the crop around the next morning, they get up, they see what's going on and the destruction that's all around. I just read something this past week that said that it destroyed the house, and within 2 or 3 days, 41 people of the neighbors had come in to rebuild them a one-room house. Wow. And I'd never seen that before. So, you're learning new stuff all the time. But that's when community comes together, right? To help one another. Well, it was actually at this time that he's seeing what's happened to the crop. It's gone. He thought about Alexander Campbell, how that he had been so successful as a gospel preacher, but also as a businessman. He thought, well, I could support myself and I could still preach the gospel. And so he decided that day that he was going to preach the gospel. And so very, very soon thereafter, he started preaching. But he wanted to try to help his family the very best he could, so he would put in crops in the spring and, of course, harvest late summer. And then when it came time for him to take in the crop, he still needed money to take care of his family, so he entered into the coal mines. And, of course, Walker County has long been known for its coal mine. Mostly strip mining is the last generation, but he went down into the, real into the earth. It's just some of the things that he talks about. He makes reference to the darkness of sin in some of his preaching, and he refers to how one time he went down into the earth and his light went out, and no one else was around, and he just kind of felt around. And he talked about how that I could have just fallen into a hole that took me down for, and I've never been heard from again. But, he finally, and then he talks about how horrible thing it is to the blackness of sin being separated from God. So he utilized the power of that experience. But there were a lot of times where he would go to work on a Monday morning before the kids got up and go to the coal mine. Then he would go down there, would not get back home until late at night, and then be back down there before the kids woke up. Kids wouldn't even see him until Sunday morning. Then they'd spend the day with him at church, and then when they'd be bedded down that night, they wouldn't see him again for a week. It's because he was doing the coal mine work to take care of his family. This is a picture I had not seen until just this past week. So about 1918, he goes to Alabama Christian College at Berry, Alabama. And it had been a school that had started in 1912, and it had, of course, it's in Fayette County, isn't it? So it's a little hard to travel to, but Gus and his brother Charlie ended up going. Five of his brothers ended up preaching, but or 5 other brothers ended up preaching, but Charlie and Gus go to Alabama Christian to be educated. One time they had a debate with one another. It was around the time for the right for woman's vote, and so Charlie took the position that it was right for women to have the right to vote, and Gus took that it was wrong for the woman to take the right for the vote. So I guess Charlie won that debate. We have probably one of his first reports to the Gospel Advocate there when he talks about, he says, we have following a report from Gus Nichols in Berry, Alabama. J.D. Tant closed a meeting here last night with 11 baptized, 1 restored, and the church edified, and good interest aroused in the school. When the school finally closed, he didn't quite finish his college education, but he had enough information and learned enough about learning that it really set him on a course for success in his life. He heard about a work over in Cordova, Alabama. It was kind of the south central area of Walker County, and so he determined to take his family over there. It's only there for a couple of years. While he was there, he made several trips back over to Lamar County, and even made reports to Lamar County saying, boy, they sure need a man that would go over there and work. And so he ended up being that man. He was only there, like I say, for a couple of years. But it was while he was there that he went to Jasper to start a new work. The Christian church had been planted several years before in Jasper. But some of the members there had wanted to bring the instrument in. So they brought the instrument in, and when he was living at Cordova, he came to find out that there were people living in Jasper that were coming down to worship with them, and they were wanting a restored congregation in Jasper. So he decided that he would go up there and start a congregation. So there was one of the members, longtime member, Brother Avery Fike. He was one of the elders there for years and years. But Brother Fike was a member of the church, and he told this story. One day he's walking down the street, and he was in front of the Christian church, and he looked down and he saw an arrow on the sidewalk made out of chalk. And at the end of the arrow said, "Gospel preaching this way." And so he followed the arrow. So arrow after arrow, turn left, cross the street, down the road, and he just followed the arrows that were made by chalk. And it showed where he gets to this building. It was an IOOF building. And there was a sign there that says, "Gospel preaching, Gus Nichols, minister at Cordova Church of Christ." And he's going to start preaching. So I can just picture young Gus getting down on his hands and knees with chalk in front of the Christian church to go down there. Of course, that was always an interesting story about his life. So he finally decides at 26 to move over to Lamar County, and he has a very successful work in Lamar County. He's there 7 years. He does circuit preaching. He's preaching various congregations all around. And he makes several reports. When I wrote this book, I didn't have any diaries. All I had was reports to the Firm Foundation as well as the Gospel Advocate. And so a lot of these things I just had to glean from the reports that he made. So some of the things he was doing while he was there, that's the only way we know about it, the success of his work. And so 1927, he makes a report that he's preached 336 times, and he does 3 Bible classes a week. One story about the Bible classes: in the wintertime, he wouldn't be able to make the trips out to, there weren't any paved roads out in the county, and so everything is like boggy. You can't get down there to them. I've had somebody ask me before, if Gus Nichols lived today, would he use Twitter? I have no question in my mind. He would use Twitter, anything else. And the reason I know is because when he was in Lamar County and he couldn't get to the brethren in the county, he would use the party line telephone system. At a certain time, he'd have everybody in the area to pick up the phone, and he would teach a Bible lesson. And of course, anybody that wanted to listen in could sit there and listen to the Bible being taught as well. So he was enterprising, and so I would imagine he would use Twitter today, or whatever he could use in order to get the message out, Facebook, and I'm sure whatever else he could find. He was that way, very, very enterprising in his work. 1928, he preached 294 times, 47 baptisms, 24 restorations. In 29, preached 13 meetings, 310 sermons, 86 baptisms. So it's good we have that information. I'm so thankful that we had those reports in those papers, because they are definitely our history. 1930, he leaves Lamar County to move back to Jasper, where he's going to spend the rest of his life. He writes to the Advocate and says, during the 7 years spent here, I delivered 2,500 discourses and baptized more than 1,000 souls. This year being our most successful year, with 228 baptized to date. So he was successful. As I said, the family moved back to Walker County. At that time, the congregation had just built a new building on 5th Avenue, and his family were able to move into a house that was right next door to the building. The old building is still standing. In fact, the house is still standing as well, even though they've moved across the street. And so he would preach there one Sunday. He would go back down and preach at Cordova as well. When he arrived, the church just was so weak. They didn't have elders, so he started training elders. And so he started a Friday night program where people would come in, and over the years it just continued to grow. He would do it mainly from about September until January or February was how it started. But pretty soon, more than just the people at Jasper were there. They had people coming from all over the countryside to come and to hear his lessons. You may see some pictures of some people that you may recall. I know I see Marvin Bryant there, and I see V.P. Black there, and of course Brother Nichols is in the back. I think I've got that picture in the book. Great relationship took place in the teaching life, the person of Brother N.B. Hardeman. I spent a little time talking about Brother Hardeman, his influence on the family. He names one of his sons Hardeman, and Hardeman's still living. He lives in Dallas. His wife Virginia just passed away not too long ago, and Hardeman is not in the best health, and we want to pray for Hardeman and his sister Bertha. They're the only two of the children that are still alive. But so he's the kind of the influence. Brother and Sister Nichols utilized these great preachers as they wanted their sons to be great, and to have these kinds of names meant so much to pass on to their children. And so 1928, Hardeman is born. The son's in 1930. He visits Frieda Hardeman's campus, Gus does, and he sees it for the first time. It's actually at a graduation week. The festivities were about a week long, and he's so impressed with what's going on there. And so he comes back and writes one of the first articles that he's ever sent to the Gospel Advocate about his impressions of Henderson, Tennessee. It's just really a neat story about his impressions there and how that Christian education ought to be something that is a viable option for every Christian family. And he really gets down into talking about how, we don't have any trouble spending money on some of these horrible other things, but we really ought to be focusing on bringing our children up in the admonition of the Lord. In 1937, he attends his first series of the special courses that N.B. Hardeman had started there on the campus. It was like a 3-week type session. They would come in on a Monday, and they would go through Friday or Saturday, and then early Saturday, the preachers would leave and go back to their homes, and then they would start Monday again. For 2 or 3 weeks, he got H. Leo Bowles from Nashville to come, and it was just really, really successful for Gus. Helped him to study and to learn more. In 1941, he began handling the query box discussion that later became the open forum that if you've been to Freed Hardeman's lectures, you know about. But he was really good at being able to tell what the scriptures meant. For about 16 years, he actually conducted the open forum before it was handed off to Guy and Woods. The reason they gave it to Brother Woods is because Brother Nichols would get one question, and he would go for the whole time trying to answer that one question. And so they wanted to get Brother Woods because he had a legal background, and he could get up there and just snap off, and they could get through like 8 or 10 questions in one 45, 50-minute time. So, but Brother Nichols was always welcome to go, and some of you that were there, you'll remember times when Brother Guy and Woods would get up and say something that Brother Nichols would disagree with, and of course, I bet you could just see Brother Nichols would get up and he'd make his way to the microphone, and of course he was able to do so. In 41 also, they had mock debates. Brother Hardeman thought that the best thing training his student preachers needed was to learn how to debate. And so they'd have mock debates, and they would deal with denominational doctrines and teachings. And so he would assign various different preachers to take the affirmative on a certain subject, but Brother Nichols was always selected for the negative. And the reason is because Brother Nichols had so many debates that it was thought that Brother Nichols knew the position of the denominationalists more than they did. And so if anybody could handle it, he would be able to handle it. And if there was ever a problem that arose, then Brother Nichols could explain it. One such occasion did arise. There was a time where Brother Nichols was supposed to have a mock debate with Brother B.L. Douthit, Boone Douthit. Brother Douthit was a Kentucky preacher, West Kentucky preacher, and they were supposed to have a discussion on baptism. So the story goes that Brother Nichols had gone to Boone before the debate and said, we really need to get together and go over some things. Brother Douthit, he's an older man, he just says, I don't need to talk about anything, And he said, "No, are you sure we really ought to get No, don't need to." Well, the debate came, and Brother Nichols got up there and started preaching stuff that Boone Douthit had never dealt with in his life. And in fact, so much to the point that Brother Hardeman thought, "Oh no, I don't know whether it was really a good idea to have these kind of debates, because we have Brother Nichols proving the denominational side stronger than our brethren can defend the truth." So finally, Brother Nichols, I think it was the next day, Brother Nichols came back and explained how he would handle an objection or a view such as that. And so Brother Nichols, you weren't going to get much on him. He was an amazing writer. Some of the most powerful things for one who you would think didn't have a PhD, but it was so simple but so poignant in the way that he could come across some of the most simple ways to describe things to illustrate things. And so he utilized his skills early on, even when he was back in Lamar County. I think the first report of a paper is a little paper he called The Gospel Way. I had read about that like several years ago, and then all of a sudden I was at 6th Avenue Library one day, and I was going through some old stuff, and all of a sudden I came across Volume 1, Number 1. I was like, I don't mind. So this picture is very, very special here. That's Volume 1, Number 1 of The Gospel Way. He had bought this great bulky typeset type printer that with movable type. He had painstakingly put in every letter to be able to do one page. I mean, it was really an old standard, but he did that. When he moved to Jasper for a short time, and I've never seen the Gospel Standard, but he mentioned that paper came out. 36, there was a Birmingham paper called Truth and Love that he was asked to participate. There was like 2 or 3 preachers down there, Gardner Hall and a couple others I can't even think of, that he participated with. He, not living there, still, Birmingham needed a paper, and so he was part of that. By 1937, it had increased to 11,000 subscriptions. So it was growing and prospering in a wonderful way. By 1942, he becomes the sole editor. All the other preachers had moved out of the area, and he becomes the sole editor for a time. And then in 44, he begins writing for the Gospel Advocate, and he writes for the Advocate the rest of his life. In fact, later on, even becomes the editor of the question and answer section of the paper. Debating, he had over 100 debates. Probably his most prominent debate was that with C.J. Weaver in 1943. It was in Huntsville, Alabama. Weaver was a holiness preacher, believed to be the most effective defender of that denomination's positions, but when Brother Nichols debated him, they put it on the local radio every night in Huntsville. But before the end of the week, Florence had heard about it, and they wanted to be in on it, and so they connected so that the last couple of nights of the debate, all across North Alabama was hearing this debate on the radio. They were saying over 15,000 people were hearing that debate, and it's on several different subjects. Even I think foot washing was the last thing that he dealt with. But the book was released a year or so later. 2 different people, Guyan Woods and B.C. Goodpasture, was asked to give, and both of them were, big in the books. They asked to say, what are the 100 most important books that every preacher needs to have? And both of them listed the Weaver-Nichols debate as being, every preacher ought to have a copy of that debate. And it's powerful. Well, of course, Montgomery, Alabama is such a special place and such a special time that in history that Gus Nichols had a relationship with this school. Of course, the school starts, it was Montgomery Bible School, and it starts out in 42 with 24 students. By the following year, they had to change the name because they had more students that were in the college classes than in the high school classes, so they changed the name to Montgomery Bible College. In 1944, Gus Nichols appeared on the 2nd annual lectureship program. The reason he wasn't on the one the year before is because he was in the Weaver debate up in Huntsville at the time, so he couldn't be here. But he was on until 75. He was on every lectureship here for various different roles. In 1952. The board was thinking about ways in which they could make the institution more viable to more people, to bring more students in. The school at Berry had closed its doors several years before, and Gus said, they talked to him, Brother Nichols said, you really ought to call it Alabama Christian School. Don't make it a Montgomery school, make it an Alabama school. And that's why it was changed to Alabama Christian College. In 1958, he was added to the board, and he was on your board of trustees here until his death. And so he was greatly loved and known here on this campus. And of course, in 1969, y'all decided to build a library here and name it after Brother Nichols. And so the building was built at cost of $400,000, and it's still a wonderful tribute. You can go through the doors today and you can see that picture of him and one of Sister Matilda as you go through the doors. Very, very special memorial to them and for their life and work. In 1946, he went on the radio. Walter Will, bankhead entrepreneur in the area, decided that he wanted to have a radio station. And so one day he's walking down the road, he sees Gus Nichols out. He says, Gus, I'm going to start a radio station. And Gus said, well, I want to be on the first day. And sure enough, when it started in November the 2nd, 1946, the third hour, Gus Nichols' voice is heard. He has this interesting way of spending time, the first part of it telling news, events, anniversaries, birthdays. He will not promote denominational meetings or revivals, but he will promote brotherhood revivals and things like that. And so then he would devote the last part of the time to Bible study. One story that I heard Brother Hardiman say, it's been 3 or 4 years ago, well, I guess maybe 10 years ago now, but I heard Hardiman tell the story about when he was getting older, he was having a little more trouble with his hearing. And so one day he was on the radio and was giving the announcements of things that are going on. And all of a sudden the phone rang. Well, the secretary hadn't come in. The early morning, the secretary hadn't come in. So he says, well, that might be some news I need to get. So he says, if you'll hold on. And so he gets up, and you can hear, his chair squeaking, and he gets up and he goes over and answers the phone. And he said, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, all right, I'll sure announce it. So he hangs it up. He goes back over there and he says, now, Miss So-and-so just called, and she said she had pulled up to the bank, got out of her car, and all of a sudden she realized she had lost her teeth. And said, if anybody's seen so-and-so's teeth, could you call and let us know where her teeth are? And so a few minutes later, he's in there, and all of a sudden the phone rings again. And he said, oh, maybe somebody's found her teeth. And so he stops and he goes over there and he picks up the phone and he says, yeah. Oh, ooh, yep, now that is important. Oh, yeah, okay, all right, I'll sure let them know, I sure will. Hangs up, comes back over there and he sits down. He says, folks, I'm sorry, it wasn't her teeth that was missing, it was her keys. It was meant to be an information opportunity. So he picked up another radio broadcast in 1956. At that time, there was a rage in the brotherhood over institutional cooperation. And he was having to defend quite a bit, and an opportunity arose for him to be able to get on this the second broadcast. And so he picked that up. At first, he was going to utilize the preachers in the area, but he found that most of the time he needed to pick up because the non-institutional brethren had a broadcast before and said some things that directly against him and his teaching. And so he would, sometimes preachers were sitting there with their Bibles and he would say, sorry, I got to answer that. And so they would kind of have to scoot over and he would come in there and respond with a biblical answer to the challenges. So that broadcast has been going. It's ever since. It's in its 74th year. It's been on several different stations, but it's still a broadcast that's used. In 1948, he published a series of sermons for the whole year leading up to that. He had put in a full-length sermon in the local Daily Mountain Eagle newspaper. And so at the end of the year, the elders said, why don't you take those sermons and put them in a book? So that's what they did. And so they had one issue of it. Finally, in 49, they had a second issue that they came out with. 48, he becomes assigned the query department answers. G.C. Brewer had done that for several years. Had done the answers. People write in, ask biblical questions, and he did this again the rest of his life. 49, he becomes the founding member for Child Haven, children's home there in Coleman, Alabama. He's a great promoter of the Gospel Advocate, and David was mentioning about our footnotes, a lot of footnotes about his connection with the Gospel Advocate and his work. He and Brother B.C. Goodpasture, who was the editor, were great friends. They worked together. In 1962, he and Ira North, who was a well-known preacher in Nashville, preached at the largest congregation, Churches of Christ, in the Brotherhood there at Madison. They got into a subscription challenge, and so I kind of go into a little bit of detail about the back and forth. It was a friendly banter back and forth. Gus was trying to raise more subscriptions than Ira North. Finally, North wins 4,761 subscriptions to Gus's 3,838. Ira North won $100 for doing it. He took the $100 and he gave it to Brother Nichols and said, I want this $100 to be the first $100 that would go toward sending Brother Nichols to the Holy Lands. And so from that till about 1st of May, brethren just pour money in, sending money in. So at the end, not only does he get to go, but Sister Nichols is able to go. Flavel is there. Brother Gaddis Roy was there. Some of you remember him. And they went on that trip in May. I forgot now how many countries that they went to. 1962, Words of Truth. Growing up, I only knew of him in the last part of my life. So to me, I only really connected him with Words of Truth, and perhaps many of you did as well. But of course, that was the end, kind of the end of the career work. And Words of Truth was weekly, and it was something that went into so many homes and was greatly appreciated by so many people. Number of accolades he received. He received a Christian Service Award by Pepperdine University. He just went out there to preach one time at their lectureship. And after it was over, they just said, Brother Nichols, have a seat. And they presented him with this Christian Service Award. He received 2 Doctorate of Laws, one right here on the campus in '69. He received from, it was when the library was dedicated. It was that weekend of the graduation, and so they had the dedication ceremony at the library, and that evening they come back for the graduation. James Baird, who is the president of Oklahoma Christian, he is the featured speaker, and at the end he, on behalf of Oklahoma Christian, awards the Doctor of Laws honorary degree upon Brother Nichols. So he had 2 honorary doctorates, one from, of course, Magic Valley. George D. Hoff presented that to him in '64. There was a preacher's school library in India. It had bore the name Gus Nichols Library. Child Haven to this day has a Gus Nichols cottage. The Indian Creek Youth Camp up there just outside of Jasper has a Gus Nichols pavilion. 1957, award for outstanding Christian service from Freed Hardeman University and or Alumni Association. 63, I mentioned about the service award. 76, I mentioned before about the posthumous award. Let me just show you a few things. Here's your mid-20th century PowerPoints.
Yep.
And short sheet sermons. That was the way they preached. And W.G. Pemberton, I could tell you a big story about that, but I've written in the book. I'll read the book. Powerful story about Pemberton being converted. He was the guy that drew the sheets for Brother Nichols, and he was converted by drawing the sheets for Brother Nichols. And so that's a powerful story. But here's some of the sheet sermons. Boy, very ornate, and would have been very eye-catching for an audience in small town USA to be able to hear those powerful sermons. Great things of Pentecost. And I think it was around 1967, they had a 30-minute documentary on the life of Brother Nichols by the Herald of Truth. He preached in 27 states and 4 different countries. He wrote over 10,000 sermon outlines. In fact, he was asked one time how many sermon outlines. He said, I think I could just sit down and write about 10,000 sermon outlines. But he was just that, he was just a walking, talking Bible. Knew the Word of God. Baptized over 12,000 people, estimated in his lifetime. Held, of course, over 100 debates. 4 of his brothers preached, Charlie, Carey, Purvey, and Archie. Altogether, 5 of them preached the gospel. And Flavel and, of course, Hudson and Hardeman were gospel preachers. 3 daughters, Gracie, Bodie, and Carrie, married preachers. Over 20 preachers from the extended family. And we still have family members that are preaching the gospel even to this day. Brother Nichols went home on 16th of November 1975. If you ever have a chance to go through Jasper, Alabama, go through North Jasper on Highway 5 heading toward Haleyville, which is my hometown. Just right out of town, you've got the cemetery there on the right, and Brother Nichols is in what they call a circle of honor right out there in front of the offices outside. They only had they got the circle of honor in view of having dignitaries in the town for probably 30 years. Gus Nichols' grave was the only one there. And then, of course, Sister Nichols, and now Flavel and Miss Mary are buried there beside them there at Walker County. So look at my website, read more about the Nichols, get a copy of the book. In fact, I've got a picture there. I have some sheets if you don't have the money today and want to maybe take this home. It's got information on it, on how you can order it online. Or phone number there, give me a call. You know, I've sold about 500 of these, and I'm just not making anything on them. Just wanting to get them out to folks and let them know about it. So, how many of you heard Brother Nichols preach? Man, that's just wonderful. Wonderful.
God.
Yes, sir.
I went to Petey one night when he preached in south of Montgomery here. He preached for an hour and 15 minutes. Somebody said, amen, and he preached another 30 minutes.
Tell that
I think that's
story.
why brethren don't amen anymore.
Tell that story that Flavel always used to tell about Christian.
Oh yeah, Christian. I didn't tell that story. When they were living in Lamar County, Flavel started the congregation at Christian Chapel, and that's where the Hesters and the Blacks, a lot of them are buried, several of them. But there was a brother Golden Curry,
Yes, Golden
that
Curry.
was that had been a convert, wanted to start a congregation near his home. So he had gone and he had split logs and set up a little place outside in front of his house where people could sit on those split logs for preaching. So Brother Nichols would come and he would preach for him. And so Brother Curry, at the end of the service, if he ever was called on to lead a prayer, he would always pray, thank God for the hour of service that we have had this evening. Well, one night he needed to go up to Vernon to do a little business, and so Brother Nichols, boy, he got wound up, and he kept going and going and going. So at the end of the service, well, he says, we'll ask Brother Curry to lead us in our closing prayer. And Brother Curry started his prayer by saying, Lord, we're so thankful for these 2 hours and 57 minutes. They're lot of stories like that. And I've been amazed at how many people I found that have said, "Oh, you didn't know about my story," and I didn't. There's just a lot of stories still out there. But one of the reasons I wanted to write this is because as I've grown older, I remember just about every week hearing somebody say, "Well, Brother Nichols once said," or "he says this," and I'm not hearing it anymore. And it's sad to see that we're forgetting these great soldiers. And so, I know he died in 1975, but I really, really believe that if you will take the time to read this book, he will inspire you in your ministry. And I wish I could afford to get into all our schools of preaching just to get our young men to read about this great man's life and his great sacrifices and works for the kingdom of God. I want to say this in closing. I really, really appreciate Faulkner University for allowing a group of us fellas, and we're just some Christian men who love the truth, love the history of the church. We've called ourselves Friends of the Restoration, and basically we just love the idea of going back to the Bible to be the church that you read about in the New Testament. And we see such a wealth of information there that we really wanted to just share. And I appreciate how much Faulkner has jumped on board with that. Ansel Jenkins couldn't be here today, wanted to be here so bad. Ansel's he's getting older, and he lives in Houston, and he's struggling in his health. If you're a friend with him on Facebook or anything, send him a note and just tell him how much you appreciate him, because he was really the one that pushed this with Brother May and others to get this going. And so for the last, I don't know how many years, David, we've been doing this. We've been doing this a long time. And we have had some really, really good opportunities to hear about the good work that's been done for the last number of years. And it's been my honor to be a part of that.
And may I add, I'll say more about this tonight at the dinner. This is not the end of this by any means. We were the first ones to host this, and we are determined for this to be a continual part in some way of what we do here at Faulkner. If I have anything to do with it, it will always be a part of whatever we do, because it's that important. So I'll have more to say about that tonight.
Good. Hope everybody can go to the dinner over at the...
Bill Boyd's going to be talking after the dinner speech about the connections between early restoration efforts in Tennessee and early restoration efforts in Alabama. If you want to come here.
Have y'all moved in over at the Philadelphia Meeting House yet? You just kind of moved on in? He lives right next door to
Yeah, he does.
I can walk down there to it. So.
If you ever go to the old Philadelphia Meeting House outside McMinnville, you'll see him somewhere around there start talking about the church that met there, and you'll spend about the next 2 or 3 hours.
Appreciate Brother Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. 5 o'clock is when the dinner is over at the University Church Fellowship Hall.
Very good.